Hello! Happy July! Hope everyone is having a great start to July and a great start to their summer. I know that June was really busy for me, and I actually wrote about this in the last Babblings report. It was interesting comparing it to January, 6 months prior, and how different those two times are as far as like busyness and socializing and all of these things. I mean, every weekend in June I was traveling, I was going somewhere. My sister got married, grad parties, festivals, like all of these different things. Versus January, there was so much silence and like solitude and stillness. But they so starkly contrast each other purposefully, and we're meant to live differently during different parts of the wheel and the wheel of the year, and really live within like the ebb and flow of life. We're not meant to go, one speed all of the time. And it was actually funny. It was May, maybe beginning of May, when the trees started. I just like walked outside one day and all of a sudden my trees were full of leaves again. And I had, for the first time, I don't think I've ever felt this kind of feeling for spring. I'm usually always just so excited for spring. Spring means it's my birthday and the renewal. And, I love the transitional season so much, but I think I spent so much time intentionally trying to enjoy all of the different seasons in this last year and spending so much time in nature, especially during winter. And I felt this little piece of grief seeing all of the greenery on the trees, which is so funny because usually I feel relief, and I felt relief at the same time too, but I've never felt kind of heartbroken to see the leaves again. And I think it was because and I knew at the time, but I didn't realize how much until now, how much I really needed winter and really enjoyed winter and really enjoyed my time in nature. And there was a lot of snow and it did get tiring, but I really felt such a mirroring between myself and the trees. And when there's not a lot of people at the park when there's 2 inches of snow on the ground, and having that time alone in my own backyard or at the park or walking my street with like the quietness of winter and also like the bareness of the trees, and just seeing like they're so vulnerable during that time. And I think this winter was a really vulnerable time for myself as well, and how I just felt so much comfort feeling like a kindred spirit to the bare trees. And it's not that it's a bad thing. And I think with any change comes grief. With any change, our body and our mind processes it similarly to grief, because in order for there to be change, that means something is ending, right? In order for something new to begin, something has ended, and whether something needed to end or was forced to end, or we're happy for it to end, and we're happy or not for our next adventure, for our new beginning, there still is grief, even small, for what was. And it was just so funny. I've never been like sad to see the green on the trees, but I was just like, oh, it's hard to see you all covered up, because I feel like I got to know the trees so intimately, this winter. It takes time, and it takes attention to detail, and it takes a stillness to see ourselves mirrored in nature. Also at that same time, when all of the green was coming back, there was all of this yellow from the dandelions. And I love dandelions, and the last couple of years I made a real effort to, whenever they come out, to harvest them and to pick as many dandelions as I can. And hopefully one day, when I feel like I'm picking from a safe enough spot, even though we don't spray, people around us spray, and I live really close to farms, and that stuff travels through the air so fast, so I don't feel comfortable digesting or making teas out of my dandelions yet. or dandelion root coffee is something that I want to make eventually, but I do harvest them and then dry them and use them for like my little spells throughout time or throughout the year. I've done that the last couple of years and just made an intentional effort to be grateful when I see them, because so many people see them as pests, but they're really such, like, they're the herald of spring. They're one of the first colors we start to see, and plants we start to see, and they're the first food for the bees that then pollinate and bring everything back to life, and for the critters. And I was watching all of these like ladybugs crawl through the dandelions this spring, and where I am there, I think I was also just memorized because there's just like fields and fields of dandelions like I've never seen before. And I was thinking about how, you know, they're really a sign of spring. And what is spring? Spring is about new life, and at the same time you're seeing like the baby bunnies and the baby birds, and the baby eagles were hatched at the park near me, and you're seeing, you know, all of this new life, and the fawns, like, they're just babies, and all of this new and like life-giving and like fertile energy, and how the dandelions are connected to that. And then I was thinking, you know, their color, they're this like bright yellow, and sometimes they're in the centers, they get a little deeper, like gold and almost orange. And I'm just thinking about how, and I'm such like I attention to detail and pattern recognition, and so it's just making me think, you know, this idea of those colors being symbolic of life, because what else has those colors? Like the sun, and the sun is the ultimate, you know, giver of life. And I think also at the same time I was reading this spring for our Babblings book club. We had Nature Nonfiction Spring, and so I was reading Strata, Stories from Deep Time, which is all about the formation of the planet and everything that had to come together, and how we got, you know, air, and then, you know, water and mud and plants and photosynthesis and oxygen, and like all of these things that had to come together over billions of years in order for, you know, for us to experience life and to be able to live on this planet. And thinking then too, because about fire also the same colors, right? Yellow, gold, and orange. And fire is, you know, the literal manifestation of life here, the element that we have, and in a different way than water, because, you know, fire too is the embodiment of human creativity, I feel. And, you know, also around the same time I was reading a lot and talking a lot on the blog just about how, and on TikTok, about how what we view as intelligence isn't necessarily, you know, true intelligence, or how we have this very like colonized and westernized view of what intelligence and creativity is. And thinking about someone like Harriet Tubman, who ran, you know, the Underground Railroad and freed all of these slaves, but was illiterate, and you can't say that she wasn't intelligent. I think I said one time, you know, like humans created fire and they weren't reading the Odyssey, you know, while doing that. And it's true, because the creativity to find a way to harness fire, you know, and be able to create fire on our own without it being spontaneous, and figuring out how to create it on our own and then control it, you know, changed human evolution. It changed, you know, our migration patterns, it changed our sleeping patterns, it changed how we eat it changed everything, and gave us a different chance at life. And I think that's also, you know, fire is also very representative of passion, and these colors I'm talking about are also very representative of passion too. And I was thinking, like, okay, like what else is like these colors? And I was thinking a lot about then like the solar plexus and the sacral chakra. The solar plexus, like kind of like mid chest, like at the bottom of our rib cage above our stomach, is is yellow and is the color that represents it, and it's about, you know, personal power and exercising that. And the sacral chakra, which is below, like more in our, like our gut, and that's represented by like a deeper orange, and it represents creativity and passion and this like a life force, like life-giving, nurturing energy. And all of these things that I've already talked about, like fire and passion and creativity and the chakras and even the sun, like there's a real connection to sexual energy too that I was thinking about. And, you know, no matter your gender, we all have the capacity to give birth, or not to give birth, but to contribute to giving life into the world in some way, and like in the literal sense of contributing to creating another person, but also thinking about things we give life to don't just have to be like literal people. You know, we give life to art and to writing and to projects, and we birth these other more like creative and passion projects into the world as well, and how that's all, you know, connected. And I'm really not trying to center this around heterosexual relationships. I'm just trying to connect this idea of creating life and giving birth to something, and in this idea of like human creativity, right, of like giving birth to fire, right, and like the control of fire, like this idea of like bringing things into the world in a creative way, being connected to sexual energy. I'm not saying that like you have to, you know, give birth to something. I see everything as energy. And I was kind of connecting these dots, and dots that I had already had, but thinking about the pattern and like thinking about how, you know, you can see it in different cultures and mythologies throughout time, and even thinking about like Christian mythology and Jesus, you know, the Son of God is representative of the sun, like a sun god would be in a different religion, and or mythos. And, you know, reading outside of like the Bible, there's a lot of thought of like Jesus as like the person, as like a literal person, you know, doing energy work, learning about Reiki, and working with Mary Magdalene. There's a lot of literature about Mary Magdalene and them working together to like use sexual energy to like elevate their consciousness and like elevate the world, right? And again, like the sun and sex and yellow and orange, like all being connected in some way. And I was really thinking about too how in the last, you know, 3 years as I've been on my abstinence journey, I've been the most creative I've ever been, and I've been the most open to let this like creative ideas and juices like flow through me. And thinking about how all of these things are connected, you know, is it a coincidence that that's happening at the same time when I have been abstinent? And I don't want this to come across like I'm trying to demonize sex, or to say not to have sex, or to say that I don't like sex, because I love to fuck. Okay, I'm a hedonist, I'm a Taurus, I love pleasure. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't have pleasure, and I'm not even saying, you know, that it needs to be sacred in a like a purity culture way, you know, but I do think the world and all of us are made up of energy, and there is like an energy exchange. And it's not just too that I've been abstinent. In that time, I've done a lot of healing with, you know, my own sexual trauma, and decolonizing my ideas of my body and of pleasure, and deconstructing, you know, shame from society or growing up around, you know, these kind of like Christian beliefs, and this idea that sex, you know, has one purpose or is one thing. And so I want to be clear that that's not what I'm saying. I'm talking about what I've learned through deconstructing these ideas and finding ways to, you know, stimulate myself without this, you know, the imagery that's bombarded me, you know, since I was 10, and these ideas of what we think sex is because of porn and because of media, and taking a break from porn and finding different ways, like I said, to stimulate myself. And through all of that, I have really, and I don't talk about this a lot, found a way to what I feel is harness this energy and be present within this energy, and direct this energy in certain ways, whether it be to, you know, fuel my life or my creative projects or my manifestations. You know, sex magic is maybe something that people think is taboo, but I think it's really learning how to harness that energy that we create when it comes to pleasure, whether with ourselves or with a partner, and finding ways to alchemize that and push that energy into something else. I don't want to tell people that they need to be abstinent, because I don't think that you do. And like I said, it's not just that I've been abstinent, but as someone too that, because I do love pleasure so much, you know, and after a breakup, I found myself falling back into these patterns of my earlier adulthood, where I was using, you know, sex and alcohol as a form of self-harm and as a way to disassociate from my life and like to deal with my anxiety and depression that I've dealt with, you know, my entire life. And I realized that I was slipping back into that, and that I didn't want to. I wanted to be present. I wanted to work through these things. I didn't want to keep hurting myself. You have to first acknowledge, you know, that you are. And so, you know, everyone might not be using sex in that way. Though I do think too, it's funny, people look at me so oddly and have a hard time swallowing as I've talked about my abstinence journey, like in person and with friends of friends, and even with friends. It's like, how could you do that? I could never go without sex, da 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 da. And I just feel like if that's the first thing that comes to your mind, maybe you should, because I think a lot of people don't realize what they're looking for in those intimate moments with other people. And it doesn't always have to be, you know, it doesn't always have to be romantic. It doesn't always have to be, you know, intimate or with like a deeper meaning. You know, I don't think it does. And if you're like me, where you can really separate those things and you just love pleasure for the sake of pleasure, you know, this might not be true for you, but I think there are a lot of people that are really just looking for a connection and trying to find connection and trying to find, you know, intimacy, and they're looking for that in lust or through sex. But because you're so disconnected from yourself, and because you haven't done that deconstruction work, even with like a trusted partner, I don't think people realize how fleeting, you know, that feeling of connection is when you're not like connected to yourself. And then what you're doing is you're just constantly looking for your next hit of dopamine and feeling connection, instead of, you know, feeling satisfied and feeling fulfilled. And I think that's why some people have such a hard time understanding my journey, because they don't realize that they're just like chasing a high, you know. And I was at one point, and again, that's not true for everyone, but I speak from my own personal experience where, you know, where I was, and also wanting to numb myself too. But and I say that, right, to say like everyone doesn't need to stop having sex, but I would challenge you maybe to take a break and to see what comes up for you. You know, it doesn't need to be for as long as I haven't, and I'm on a very specific journey, and it's not like I don't want to have sex. It just, I think once you get to a certain point, it makes it harder to find connection with someone who, you know, has the same intentionality behind you, because, you know, sex is not a bad thing, lust is not a bad thing. It's an energy, again, like I said, and it's about the wielder of the energy and the intention behind the energy, whether it could be positive or negative. But if this is like something you're interested in, I would encourage you to start reading more. Self plug, the Babblings summer reading curriculum is all about sex and power, so we're going to be diving into a lot of these themes, and we're reading Nasty Work right now, which is all about decolonizing pleasure, and so that would be a good place to start, and interrogating yourself about how you feel about yourself and about your body, and where those ideas, finding out where those ideas come from, and realizing and confronting how connected to, you know, white supremacy and patriarchal values they are. But I would also really encourage you to maybe take a break from porn, and maybe do some audio porn, and spend some time like figuring out like your own self-pleasure. And I'd like to do mirror work a lot, like watching yourself in the mirror, and finding, you know, also how to not perform, because we have these like media ideas in our head of what sex is. I think so much of it we're performing for the other person, and that is all genders. I don't think that that's just women. I think all genders, and whether they admit it or not, until you can like figure out that you're performing, I think a lot of us are performing. And finding ways to like be present and to be in your body and to feel your body and like get creative and experiment and like try different things and see what works and like what doesn't work. And these are all things that I've done, and a lot of journaling and a lot of self-interrogation, to, you know, where I can find pleasure just thinking about myself, like, you know, being turned on by myself, or finding pleasure thinking about my hopes and my dreams and my creative projects, and finding pleasure, like putting energy towards those manifestations. And I think, you know, one, deconstructing all of that, stripping all of that away, clearing up my energy and being more careful about the energy that I share with other people, or that I let people share with me, has opened up this like creative but also like spiritual channel that I didn't realize I could get to. Part of it too is feeling liberated and powerful and free from the constraints of like what we're supposed to want and what we're supposed to look like and how we're supposed to get pleasure, and being free of shame. You know, shame, it clouds that passion, and it dampens it, which in turn, because it's all connected, dampens our creativity. When we're in that flow and we're open to that channel and we're open to that creativity, we see the dandelions come up and we start going, oh, but it's like this, and it's like this, and it's like this, and it's like this, and the patterns, and it's everywhere, and it's all connected, and it's everything at once, you know? I've always been a very creative person, but as I think about it, I think more in service to other people or outside goals or things that didn't really matter to me, or that I didn't really feel passionate about. And maybe that's what it is too. It's not only do I feel so creative, but I feel passionate and I feel purposeful in the creative things that I'm doing. And 3 years ago, I don't think that I could have conceived babblings being what it is today. And and it's not just this, it's not just like abstinence, it's all the other things that I talked about, and not just doing that around sex, but doing it about deconstructing and getting rid of shame and societal expectations in all areas of my life, and growing and putting myself out there and trying. But I don't think I would have if I, especially for me, because I was using it to hurt myself. I think that I would be trapped on this same hamster wheel, dissociating and indulging in a way that was harmful and like reductive. And the power of dandelions. I think all of that to say, is that so often we're looking outside of ourselves for the answer. We're looking to other people to fill a void or to feel connection, when really the answers are inside of us all along. See you later. Happy July.